In 10 years of doing this, I've learned a lot about high holiday liturgy and about how to adapt and change and do different things to meet the time, but I have never learned, and I don't know how I will ever learn, how to follow with speaking after that Kaddish Shalom. The bar is very high, Chazan. Shana Tova, everyone. A good and sweet new year to you all. The first time I attended high holiday services, I was in college. And I know that sounds crazy because that is certainly not the standard timeline for a rabbi, but that's how it played out in my story. I wasn't religious growing up, and it wasn't until college when I really started to explore my Judaism. I was lucky to have an incredible teacher who helped me navigate my birthright, who showed me that unlike the non-Jewish milieu that surrounded me growing up, a milieu where religion meant and was defined by unwavering and unquestioning faith, my faith tradition encouraged questioning. It encouraged wrestling. And that is how I fell in love with Judaism, by asking questions. But as I fell in love with Jewish thought, with Jewish philosophy, Jewish wisdom and mysticism, I still approached prayer and ritual with hesitancy and skepticism. Because to me it still felt dogmatic, that I had to do things a certain way, that I had to say things a certain way, and that I had to believe things a certain way. That was until I attended high holiday services for the first time. In a small synagogue in South Dakota, where even on Yom Kippur there probably weren't more than 50 of us in the shul. And I was lost throughout the liturgy. I didn't read Hebrew, so I was relying on translation. And the translations were tough, challenging. There is some very intense and problematic poetry in the high holiday liturgy. So needless to say, I felt uncomfortable. And I felt frustrated because I was giving it a chance. But it still felt too archaic, too foreign, too out of reach for me as a young man looking for a way in. But then we got to this moment when the cantor started singing. But as he did, he started to lower himself to the ground. And then as I looked around, I saw that other people were also lowering themselves to the ground. And so, not wanting to stand out, I too lowered myself onto the ground. Years later, I can reflect that this was the Great Aleinu, the few times throughout the Jewish liturgical calendar when we go from just bowing from our knees into a full prostration to the floor. And in that moment, my teacher, my mentor, turned to me as we were lying there on that dusty carpet. And he said, "Once upon a time, we prayed to God by lying on our face. Now we pray to God by getting up, even after we've fallen on our face." It's hard to put into words what that moment meant for me. I'm pretty sure he wasn't even trying to be profound. He might have been trying to make a joke. But in that moment, my understanding of our tradition changed forever. Because for the first time in my life, I felt closer. I felt like I could, with all of my flaws, with all of my faults, with all of my shortcomings, all of my ignorance, talk to God. because I could finally wrap my head around one of the most confounding questions I'd had about Judaism and about Jewish peoplehood, which is how? How, after the most tragic and painful story of any people in human history, after so much loss and suffering and pain, so much hate and violence, could any Jew still bow down to God? And then I fell on my face. And I understood. I understood that it wasn't about bowing down. It was about getting up. You see, there's a story in that ritual. One that is far more important than a cynical kid learning about his tradition. There is a very important story in the special bow that we do on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The bow that woke me up to prayer and probably set me on my path to becoming a rabbi. And this morning I want to talk to you about the story of the lying down and getting up. Because, for one, I don't think we talk about it nearly enough. And secondly, and most importantly, because I don't think we can fully understand and appreciate Judaism. I don't think we can fully understand and appreciate us, who we are, without it. When my professor said that once upon a time we prayed to God by lying on our face, he was absolutely right. Much like the great majority of religious cultures of the ancient Near East, our ancestors embraced a firmly established belief that everything came from the whims and the will of God. Good and bad, sickness and health, sustenance and famine, life and death, all of it making up a judicial toolbox of a God of judgment and might. And to appease that God, to curry favor with that God, our ancestors relied on a system of intense and meticulously orchestrated worship. A system of animal and agricultural sacrifices meant to keep the God of Israel gracious and merciful rather than angry and wrathful. And central to that sacrificial system, to that understanding of the world and God's role in it, was an idea that the great anthropologist Mircea Eliade called an axis mundi, a sacred place where heaven and earth touched, where God could exist in the world, the place that held the infinite power of the divine. To our ancestors, that place was a center of a center of a center. It was in the middle of the wings of the Keruvim, the angelic beings that sat on top of the Ark of the Covenant, which sat in the middle of the Holy of Holies, which sat in the middle of the Beit HaMikdash, of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, which sat in the center of everything. Not just a building, not just a place of worship, but the dwelling place of God. And it was there, and only there, that our ancestors believed anyone could dare approach the Holy One. And so when our people way back in the time of the temple came to pray, they did so by making pilgrimage to Jerusalem, ascending with fear and trembling the steps leading to that sacred place. They offered their lambs, their goats, their flour and wine libations, and they fell on their face, whispering to the God of Israel, "I atone for my sins, for my missteps, and where I've gone wrong. If you can find it in your mercy, please forgive me and spare me from your anger and your punishment." That was Judaism. That was the Jewish understanding of prayer, of the world, and of God. It was until it wasn't. Because then something happened that changed everything. The world got bigger. Tribes and peoples grew into territories and empires. Mighty armies swallowed up the ancient world until one of them, calling themselves the Impera Romana, the Roman Empire, arrived at the gates of Jerusalem with swords and spears. And then they marched in. Our ancestors fought back. And they did so with confidence because the God of Israel was there, right at the center of it all, surely waiting to intervene to protect God's chosen people and to humble these foreign invaders who foolishly thought that they could fight against a God. But there was no moment of humbling. There was no miracle, no divine intervention or protection. There was only devastation. The slaughter of tens of thousands of Jews, the enslaving of tens of thousands more, and then the impossible happened. The Romans entered the Holy Temple. They entered God's home, the Axis Mundi, the place where heaven and earth touch, the place of infinite holiness and power, and the emperor named Titus gave his men an order. Burn it, he said. And that is exactly what they did. Our ancestors watched in horror as everything they knew, everything they believed, was set ablaze. Their entire understanding of the world burned to ashes and rubble before their eyes. That, my friends, should be the end of the story. For any people, for any nation, any tribe, that would be the end of the story. But it's not the end of ours. Standing there in the ruins, in the desolation, in the abyss, our survivors fell on their face. They screamed, they cried, they tore their clothes, and they broke into 1,000,000 pieces. And then they got up. For the life of me, I don't know how, but they got up. And they made the most difficult and consequential decision in the history of the world. They decided in the wake of unthinkable loss to go looking for God. Not in the heavens, not in a rebuilt palace of formality, of sacrifices, of fear and trembling. They looked for God in the rubble. And they found God in the rubble. I think it's impossible to capture just how incredible this is, to understand the theological and existential resolve of this people, to lose everything. And instead of giving up, which I feel like anyone else would have done, to pivot and create a brand new understanding of life so dramatically antithetical to the one that they had known forever. But that is what they did. Finding God in the rubble, our ancestors, our survivors, chose to see God in a different way. Not as removed from the human experience, judging from afar, but intimately connected. Not just widely to God's people, but to each of us, individually, personally. They shifted the focus away from the temple and avodat korbanot, the sacrifices of animals and crops, and they pointed the focus to the Jewish home, to the synagogue, and to the Beit HaMidrash, the Jewish study house, and to what they called avodat halev, the service of the heart. Intentional and introspective prayer, limud, Torah study, and tikkun, putting a broken world back together. Finding God in the rubble, our ancestors dared to see God in a way that no people ever had before, as vulnerable, as compassionate and consoling, as deeply and unwaveringly loving. To the world at the time, it was unthinkable. Here was a people that, instead of abandoning their faith and their history, clung to it even harder and molded it to fit the needs of the moment, even if that molding meant a dramatic reimagining of God. A God who went into exile with the Jewish people. A God who cared what happened to us, who cried with us when we needed to cry, who wrapped us up in strength and support when our hope waned, who spoke to us words of encouragement and even words of atonement, saying, "I'm so sorry that this happened, but I am here. And I will never leave you. Never. As long as you get up." And we did. Over and over again. Through the darkest of hours, through valleys of the shadow of death, we chose to hold on, to talk to God and to cry out to God and to even lament and shout, because there is incredible pain and because there is so much unknown in this world. But rather than choosing abandonment, rather than waiting for miracles or expecting intervention or unlimited power, we declared our faith through the sacred act of getting up, of emerging from the rubble and finding a way to put one foot in front of the other. Even after unspeakable loss, even after our lowest moments, even after falling on our face. That story, our story, it is what has kept us alive. It is what has brought us to this moment right here and right now, sitting together in a room as a family that has endured so much. From our individual losses and grief, to blows and traumas, to who we are as a people. We are here because we chose to get up, because we chose to live, to pray, to be differently. And this is why it is so critical that we do what we do, that we gather like this, that we pray even when it's hard to do so, even when we're not sure how, even when it feels uncomfortable or foreign or beyond our grasp. Because we don't need to understand every word. We don't need to make a sacrifice presented with perfect choreography, with pomp and precision. We just need to get up. And when we do, that is prayer. That is prayer at its most beautiful, at its most intimate, at its most sincere. Lying on a dusty floor in South Dakota, I started on a journey not to God, but with God. And it hasn't always been easy. That's not the right way to say it. That's not a fair way to say it. It has been hard. There have been times when it has been really, really hard. And there have been times when I've wanted to stay in the rubble, when I've wanted to walk away, when I've wanted to stay down on the ground with my head to the floor, but that is not what Jews do. That is not what we do. These days of awe are so incredibly powerful. They are filled with so much intense and moving poetry, music, and ritual. But there is no moment in all of our liturgy more transformative, more sacred, more beautiful, more filled with hope than these faith-filled vows of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And if you've never done it before, I can't urge you to enough. If not on Yom Kippur with us here in the sanctuary or out on the playground, then at home, when you can carve out 30 seconds or a minute of time. It's worth it. Because in that ritual, in that lying down and getting up, is an entire story. A story of how we survive. A story of how we go forward. A story where we find God in the rubble and together we get up. You deserve that story. You deserve to know that God is in exile with you. That God is walking with you. That God will hold you when you need to be held, that God will cry with you when you need to cry, and that God will even atone and say, I am so sorry that this happened. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. You deserve our prayer. And you deserve to know that no matter what, our story goes on. Because we will fall on our face. Again and again, we will fall on our face. But when we do, we'll be with God in the rubble. And together, always together, we will get up. Shana Tova.